There are two ways to promote the journal. One is sort of the conventional university press way, which is taking out ads and at professional meetings and the back pages of other journals and these mass mailings. And the general rule there is that it takes a year's subscription to get a subscription, and then you lose a high proportion of them because there are a lot of people just trying them out for a year. So that's not very thrilling. I mentioned, I guess, in that little thing I handed out that one of the tricks that I used was to write personal letters. And the secretary, he was sitting in the next room and go through these manuals of, it was the chair of the University of Göttingen or something, and I would write and say, we've just started this journal, it's the major journal in the field, if you don't buy it now, you'll be sorry because you're going to have to get the extra issue some other day, and here's a little note you've got to send to your librarian. And, the numbers, who knows why places joined, I don't know, but that was I thought that was pretty clever, actually.
I was peripherally involved as an occasional referee on very specific topics. At that point, I think it was mostly Keynes. I don't think occasionally there would be a piece sent in, like a Hans Brems kind of paper on a formal model of Ricardo's such and such, okay, and this formal model, let's, send it to Weintraub. So I was being brought in as an occasional referee on not very important papers.
Craufurd did that regularly.
Yeah.
He would use other colleagues to Bilioé, for example.
Who could read Swedish.
Etar, yes. Vlad Tremel, who's a Soviet specialist.
Yeah.
Tom Havrilesky was somewhat interested in these things. A lot of our colleagues had had exposure to history of thought in some part of their education. And in the 70s, it was not so odd that one would have these interests. I got tenure, not as quickly as Roy, but very quickly, on the basis largely of publications of an historical sort.
And you can't underestimate the fact that the importance of the fact of Craufurd's Duke connection. Craufurd was as establishment at Duke as is possible to be. He was a protege of the individuals who really created the modern Duke University.
I had left Duke in 1970 to go work for the Ford Foundation in New York, and while I was there, I had a phone call from two people that I knew, the president of Brookings, whose name was Kermit Gordon, and the head of the economics program, Joe Peckman. And they said, we've been talking and we wonder if there's any way in which the history of economics could be used as a kind of critic or commentator or post-auditor of economic affairs.
And what year are we talking about now?
1971, probably.
Okay.
And so I said, I'll think about it. And they said we were particularly interested in the problem of inflation, which has bothered government planners for the last 20 years. So I put together a proposal that we get a team of people and look at how various presidencies have dealt with this and how the economics discipline has interacted with the policymakers. And so they went out and raised the money pretty easily. I've forgotten what it was, and they did all of the operation of the project, which is a huge asset in travel and meetings and things, and also just credentials. If you're a senior fellow at Brookings, you kind of get into places. So we had to do a lot of learning. I mean, the project involved figuring out who the movers and shakers were on this subject in the various administrations, which cabinet members really mattered and which members of the Federal Reserve Board and so on. And then we would go and interview them and we would look at their papers and check back and forth. And we produced a book called Exhortation and Controls, which got a lot of attention when it came out. It was in the front page of the major newspapers. And then it became a sort of reference work for particularly journalists. I used to occasionally run into that, who wanted to get an authoritative view of what had happened in the Kennedy administration or the Truman administration or something. And that was a whole new view of how the history of economics could be used as it seemed to be. I mean, we were no longer remote doing a little thing in our little conference.
Because Craufurd has never been a person to operate with a manifesto. He has his own preferences and they evolve in various ways. But he, as an editor, as you must have discovered, his philosophy has always been to let the 100 flowers bloom. And at various times Roy and I have tried to tweak this, and I was keen at one
Maybe
point.
only 98 flowers.
Yes. Yes. You know, I was interested in pushing it a bit in the science, philosophy of economics direction, and also tried to urge more publications using data, and so economic history with history of thought. So, you know, we at the fringes would wave little flags and agree to accept certain papers which were otherwise not poor quality, but does this really fit kind of thing.
That's the mini symposia grew out of that.
Some of that,
that kind of period.
That's right. But Craufurd has never had a manifesto mentality. And it flourished perhaps partly because of that. I mean, it's been a big tent, and people have been welcome no matter what kind of history they were doing, and we might squeak in the background. But,
In his role as the editor of the journal, Craufurd has relied almost exclusively on the referees to decide what gets published and what doesn't get published. He rarely rejects a manuscript out of hand. He almost always sends it to referees and almost always does what the referees advise. He has intentionally tried to keep Hope as eclectic, as he puts it, eclectic. In other words, we'll publish rational reconstructions, we'll publish historical reconstructions, we'll publish close readings of texts, we'll publish papers that use a lot of archival materials. He's had an open mind in terms of the papers that he'll consider for publication in Hope.
Well, I think for North America, what's absolutely critical is that graduate education in the field return. And one of the reasons why I think it died out was because there was this conviction widely held among almost everybody there were no jobs. And there's no question that jobs are more complicated, but I think that A, the jobs are out there, and B, that if we worked at it, they could be out there in larger numbers, particularly at liberal arts colleges, from which people can move on if they want. But I mean, a job at Williams or Amherst or Pomona or something is a damn good job these days. I mean, if you go there, the opportunities and circumstances are great. And those places have been very happy with historians of economics, partly because they're sort of jack of all trades. They can teach macro or history or something else as well as history of thought. And so I think what Bruce is going to try to do here, and I certainly hope it'll happen, is that we get a decent graduate program going.